Asia is a melting pot where people from different walks of life rub shoulders with one another. But some groups are finding themselves left on the fringes of society. This week on CNA Correspondent, we look at those who are feeling like outsiders looking in. It's been a desperately lonely 2 years for Rajiv Ahuja. He has multiple sclerosis, more commonly known as MS. It's an autoimmune disease that makes him more susceptible to severe COVID-19. So, he's shut himself at home as he watches the world around him move on. Everyone except his wife Simi.
We were not just going beyond our gates, so it was just go backwards, and that helped, I think. Though emotionally everybody has been down, but physically we were a little safer.
Rajiv's hobbies like listening to music are helping him keep his spirits up.
Alexa, play Javed Akhtar.
His social life now is a pale reflection of what it was before the pandemic. Back then, MS seldom got in the way of socializing, traveling, or eating out.
This was in a country in some picture. This was Bahamas cruise we had done.
But now the former software engineer's every venture outside is a careful calculation between the risk of infection and the rewards of human contact.
Really, that is the big fear that they have, is that they are getting left out.
Meenakshi Bhujwala started working with the MS Society of India 3 decades ago, shortly after her husband was diagnosed with the disease. Her group estimates that nearly 200,000 people in India suffer from this degenerative disorder. She says their prolonged isolation is taking a toll, driving up anxieties over COVID-19.
We were on the phone a lot of the time, talking to people, just talking to them, getting their fears out. We were learning about COVID as we went along. Getting into somebody's head isn't easy because it's those fears still remain. We had those fears, so we haven't resumed our home visits as well.
It helps when there are support groups where they can socialize and share these fears with those in the same boat. The Cancer Society of India runs these sessions for cancer patients. Many of them have low immunity after rounds of chemotherapy and radiation. For most of the past 2 years, such support group meetings had moved online. The human contact was reduced even further, and for good measure. But now, as cases of COVID-19 drop, these people are coming back here, but with ample precautions. There are thousands, though, who are still too vulnerable to make it to such meetings. And that's where groups like CanSupport come in, to provide a friendly face and listening ear for those feeling trapped and alone. Hello.
Hi.
Hello. How are you?
Fine.
How are you? CanSupport provides care at home for vulnerable cancer survivors. We are meeting with a cancer survivor who is not even able to get out of his house to get basic therapy. And these healthcare professionals are the ones who treat him periodically. And these people might be the only support and contact he gets from the outside world for days.
हेलो नमस्ते कैसे हो
बढ़िया
ठीक हो
हाँ जी They are checking on Wasim Ahmed's health. The 18-year-old who has rectal cancer is in pain most of the time. But today, there is a rare grin on his face. The care workers tell us it's because he's happy to find himself with so many people after months alone. He was cooped up inside this tiny room when the second wave of the coronavirus swept across India last year. With barely anyone to speak to, he says his mental health was on a downward spiral.
फील तो बहुत बेकार लगता था। कल तो सर किसी से मिल नहीं पाते थे, जिससे फ़ोन करते थे तो कोई कहीं पर होता था और कोविड की वजह से बाहर नहीं जाना है और ऊपर से बीमारी और था मुझे। बीमारी की वजह से और डर लगा रहता था, शरीर में उतना है नहीं इम्यूनिटी।
These breathing exercises help calm his nerves. But once he's by himself, he says all his fears about his health come rushing back.
Loneliness is also associated with anxiety, depression, and higher suicidal rates.
Psychologist Raina Jain hosts podcast on mental health. One of her pet topics is how those who are forced to withdraw from society may feel that they are becoming outcasts.
Look, losing a sense of connection and community is really, difficult. I've seen people going through depression and have been going through this loop of overthinking all the time.
A sense of normalcy is gradually returning for those like Rajiv as COVID-19 infections dip in India. For him and other MS patients making the rare trip outdoors, this picnic organized by the MS Society is a feast for the eyes.
Thank you God that everybody's come alive now. We're back in action.
But for how long? There's a risk precious gatherings like these could come to an abrupt end as places including China and parts of Europe see a COVID-19 resurgence. Even if it doesn't lead to nationwide restrictions, it could relegate many immunosuppressed patients back to their homes, once again forcing them to watch the world go by as outsiders.
Piecing together a patchwork rug is like hoping the social fabric in Thailand will be mended. At least that's what Wacharapon Upapan is longing for. The 58-year-old hails from Royat in northeastern Isan. Isan region comprises 20 provinces, and the people there share a culture and language closer to neighboring Laos than Bangkok and the central provinces. Many city dwellers often have stereotypical views of Isan residents and tend to look down on them for being less educated as poorer country bumpkins.
เพราะว่าเราความรู้มันน้อยด้อยพัฒนาอะไรอย่างนี้ว่าให้เรามึงเรียนไปมึงก็ไม่สำเร็จหรอกอะไรว่าให้เราอย่างเงี้ยทุกอย่างจะเรียนไปทำไมเก็บเงินไว้อะไรนะเขาว่าให้เราจะมึงก็เก็บเงินส่งบ้านมึงที่เขาว่าให้มึงจะไปเรียนทำไมอันนี้แหละเราก็นั่นแหละเราก็ยังฝังใจอยู่เนาะคิดถึงความเก่าเนาะที่เขาว่ามันสะท้อนมันเห็นแล้วมันแบบว่ามันแน่นในอกอะมันพูดไม่ได้เราไม่อยากเกิดมาเป็นคนจนใช่ไหม
Wacharapon, who wants to be a teacher, feels she can only suffer in silence and continue to work hard in Bangkok. As a seamstress now, she's still trying to make ends meet as the COVID-19 pandemic meant factories have massively cut down on production.
เนี่ยเอาเฮ็ดไปใส่เองเอาบ่ต้องไปซื้อ
Wacharapon has been living in Bangkok for 40 years, but till today she doesn't consider the city as a home. That's because she still faces discrimination up till today. Initially, when she first arrived in the city, she had to endure severe criticisms and insults, but that she feels has only made her stronger and determined to prove herself to others. That's why she's even taking up a bachelor's degree in political science now. Like Wacharapon, citizens from the Isan region continue to make up the biggest number of internal migrants in Bangkok, a city where they're still sometimes viewed as outsiders. In 2020, the government said some 36,000 citizens from Isan alone moved to the capital city mainly for employment. But last year, a group of youngsters criticized Isan people on popular audio chat app Clubhouse, calling them uneducated and poor rice growers for the rich, among other things. The online abuse had sparked a backlash, but it also prompted some soul-searching among city dwellers who said it helped to raise public awareness about discrimination. Though it's not as prevalent compared to a decade ago, discrimination still exists as this mindset is deep-rooted.
The system, like educational system, communication system, or in media, like always portrayed people in the Northeast as being like housemaid, low socio-economic status, or being some kind of funny figures that people can laugh at. They do like crazy thing. They do this. They eat this dirty food. They have this raw or dirty way to prepare food that we don't really eat that way. This is how the system perpetuates.
The flow of Isan people to Bangkok is unlikely to stop anytime soon. Thailand's poverty rate has risen due to the ongoing pandemic. According to a World Bank report last year, Thailand's poverty rate would have increased by 1.6% in rural areas, with the largest increase in the northeast. Most of those who come to Bangkok to look for work usually tend to be from the northeastern part of the country. That region is home to some of the poorest provinces in Thailand, where agriculture dominates the northeast. So you can just imagine, if you've always spent your life growing up in rural surroundings and at a slow pace, the fast-paced lifestyle in the concrete jungle of Bangkok can be a culture shock and takes getting used to. And here's where many of the rural migrant workers experience discrimination and are often looked down upon by city folks. Many of the Thais who come to Bangkok to look for jobs usually tend to come to this location in the outskirts to seek freelance work. With their tools in hand, they wait for hours from the wee hours of the morning for employers to drive by, hoping to get hired for the day. If they're lucky, they'll get selected. Sometimes employers prefer to choose foreign migrant workers like those from Myanmar or Cambodia instead.
Normally they get low pay, and like one T-shirt they will get 5 baht to make to sew one T-shirt. But when they are migrant workers, and one employer hire migrant workers, and they pay very low pay to migrant workers, and the migrant worker receive like 3 baht per piece. So what happened? Like this, so it's a big issue for the Thai, because we get low pay, but we didn't have the job.
Authorities, however, disagree that local workers from the rural provinces are being neglected and discriminated against, and they point to plans such as a new law to better protect local workers such as Thai domestic helpers as evidence that they're doing something.
ในเรื่องของการดูแลคุ้มครองคนทำงานบ้านเอาเฉพาะเรื่องคนทำงานบ้านที่กำลังอยู่ในช่วงการปรับปรุงเนี่ยเราก็มีในเรื่องของการลาคลอดของคนทำงานบ้านก็คือสิทธิในการลาคลอดซึ่งเดิมมันไม่มีนะคะในเรื่องของชั่วโมงการทำงานก็มีการกำหนดเวลาชั่วโมงทำงานชั่วโมงพักให้ชัดเจนยิ่งขึ้นแล้วก็เดิมเรื่องของค่าจ้างขั้นต่ำมันไม่ได้มีการกำหนดไว้เราก็จะต้องกำหนดว่าอัตราค่าจ้างขั้นต่ำต้องเป็นไปตามอะไรอย่างเงี้ยค่ะ
Officials hope the revised law can be effective next year. But law or no law, it'll ultimately be the survival of the fittest. When describing the Isan farmers, there's a Thai saying that goes, Lang Sufa Nasudin. That means the farmers are always bent over, slogging away with their backs to the sun and their faces to the soil. And that's the spirit Wacharapon lives by.
ไม่อยากคิดจะกลับเลยนะคือมีอยากจะสู้ต่อนะสู้เลยคือบอกว่าในเมื่อคุณไอ้นั่นฉันดูถูกฉันจะเอาดีให้ได้ฉันจะเอาดีให้ได้สักวันหนึ่งมันก็คงเป็นของฉัน
The indigenous village of Serinda is less than an hour's drive away from the bustling city of Kuala Lumpur. But it's worlds apart, surrounded by lush greenery that both nurtures and isolates its inhabitants. Most of the 380 or so villages don't venture far from the woods, like 67-year-old Elok Sapa.
Dulu nenek saya tak ada bagi saya sekolah. Saya selalu duduk dalam hutan aja.
Elok spends his days tapping rubber, harvesting fruits, or chopping branches for atap roofs on the acre of ancestral land he owns behind his house. The minority community he belongs to has served as caretakers of the Selangor forest for generations, even before Malaysia's independence. They're one of many distinct tribes among the rural natives or Orang Asli, each with their own language and culture. The Orang Asli make up less than 1% of the country's population, numbering about 180,000. Many don't go through formal education and have no real source of income, which puts them on the margins of society. The forests are the only place they feel they belong, even as the spectre of development threatens to uproot them from their land.
Sebab saya tak tahu sekolah itu, saya susah nak kerja dekat bandar. Tapi kalau kerja ni, kalau kerja kilang, kalau apa yang hilang saya tak tahu. Mesti orang kilang tertekan saya sebab saya jaga dekat sana. Saya tak naklah, dia kata saya tak naklah busuk nanti nama kawan saya tadi.
It's this relative seclusion that keeps the Orang Asli shrouded in a veil of mystery, even among their countrymen.
It's just because sometimes you get the glossed over image, which is what you used to attract like tourism arrivals, or you might get the more destitute image sometimes, or you might get anything in between, right?
Non-profit group Native Discovery works with the tribe to show other communities who the Orang Asli really are. Tribes people lead groups of urbanites on hikes through the forests.
Kadang kita ajar orang lah, pokok ini, ubat apa yang ubat, hutan punya ubat, kita ajar kepada orang yang hiking semua macam tu. Dengan ada yang tak tahu kan, kita tunjuk pokok, daun bertam, macam mana buat rumah, macam tu lah. Bawa berkongsi lah semua macam mana bawa orang buat apa yang orang kampung buat, mengayam, macam masakan orang kampung lah macam mana.
This stir-fried pucuk ubi dish, made of leaves from the cassava plant, is a traditional Temuan delicacy.
So this is actually the special ingredient of today's dish, and what it's made of is from these rubber seeds.
Once these seeds are dried, they are ground and added to the dish. This is how the Orang Asli live, mostly off their land. They sell only a minimal amount of produce for income. Most of the fruits they grow are for the community's consumption, while leaves and branches are woven into items for daily use.
Terima kasih.
By welcoming groups like urban folk, they hope to open a window to their world and break down a pervasive sense of divide between themselves and much of Malaysian society.
But I feel like what's not really available is that the Orang Asli themselves don't really have the opportunity to present themselves to society in the way that they would like. And in that sense, perhaps then their representation is often from an outsider's perspective. And I think that's something that needs to change.
Others are trying to reconstruct the image of Orang Asli in mainstream society, like indigenous artist Lenny Matno. She draws hyper-realistic portraits of the Orang Asli entirely using pencil, sometimes adding features like leaves to reflect the closeness with nature. As a Temuan herself, the self-taught artist uses her deep understanding of native culture to tell the stories which otherwise may not be told or heard.
Motif utama saya melukis portret wajah-wajah orang asli kerana kebanyakan masyarakat di luar mereka tak kenal siapa itu orang asli sebenarnya. Jadi saya sebagai salah seorang daripada masyarakat orang asli saya ingin semua orang mengenali masyarakat kita punya kaum sama dengan kaum orang yang lain. Kerana masyarakat luar kan tak kenal siapa kita, jadi mereka akan memandang macam rendah. Jadi untuk masyarakat saya, untuk yang cuba nak keluar daripada kampung ataupun nak membina kejayaan, mereka kurang keyakinan diri. Macam itulah. Jadi saya di sini dengan berharap dapat memberi mereka keyakinan untuk keluar dan berjaya.
Through her work, the 41-year-old wants to push her community to the forefront of public consciousness. Besides giving life to a blank canvas, Lenny also travels across the country to teach art to children from other tribes. She hopes the younger generations of indigenous people too will be able to paint an accurate picture of the Orang Asli for the rest of the Malaysian society and keep their voices alive.